Lesson 8-3, Quadratic Equations. So when we're looking at this particular unit, we are going to be trying to get down to the quadratic equation of x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And what this is basically doing the FOIL method backwards. So if we have the example, and you know that FOIL means first, outer, inner, and last. Well, your answer is what you're actually going to be starting with, and you're going to be going backwards to get the FOIL. So if we have an example of x squared plus 6x plus 8, you want to take that and you now want to go to the quadratic equation, which is undoing the FOIL. Well, we know with FOIL that we have two sets of parentheses, and so from here you want to go backwards. Well, you know that your first two numbers are x, because when you multiply those together you get x squared. Then you have to determine what these two numbers are. To do that, you have to figure out what two numbers you can add together to get the 6 and multiply together to get the 8. And so we'll look at some examples. For this particular one, your answer would be plus 2 plus 4. Because if you did the FOIL method, then you would get this quadratic equation. So the symbols, or kind of the key concept here, is that you have the quadratic equation x squared plus bx plus c is going to equal x plus m and x plus p, when m plus p equal the b of the quadratic equation, and m times p equal the c of the quadratic equation. So for our first example, we are going to look at factoring when b and c are both positive. So my b is 9 and my c is 20. So we start out, we see that we have x squared, so that means the first two numbers or letters are going to be x, because x times x is x squared. And now we have to find two numbers that add together to give us 9, but also multiplied together to give us 20. So that would be 5 and 4. When you add them together, you get the 9. When you multiply them together, you get the 20. So now you could check this by doing your FOIL. So first would be x squared, outer would be plus 4x, inner would be plus 5x, and your last would be plus 20. So your answer would check out with the equation that you needed. So then you would say that the result to this quadratic equation is x plus 5 times x plus 4. Now, when you have one of the numbers negative and one of the numbers positive, it can become a little tricky. The easiest way to do it is to list the factors of the 12, or the c, and then find the sum of each of those factors to determine which one works for b. So what I mean by that is, let's list the factors of 12. So the factors of 12 here would be, since the c is positive and you need 1 to be negative, so the factors of this could be negative 1, negative 12, it could be negative 2, negative 6, or it could be negative 3, negative 4. The reason I'm doing negatives is because one of my numbers has got to be negative. So when I find the sum of those factors, I get negative 13, I get negative 8, or I get negative 7. Well, if you remember, we were trying to find a 12, which is what all of these numbers are, but then we were also trying to find one that has the sum of negative 8, which would be this example. So now you can factor it out. You have your x and your x. One of those would be negative 2, one of those would be negative 6. And this would be your factoring of this quadratic equation. The next example that you would have would be c is negative. So here you can see that the c, which is the negative 15, is a negative number. So we start out with our x in the front of each parentheses. Now we have to find two numbers that add together to give you 2, but that also multiply together to give you negative 15. So for this example, you would want to list the factors of negative 15 and then find the sum of those factors. So the factors of negative 15 would be negative 1 and 15, or negative 3 and 5. And so if we find the sum of both of these, the sum of the first set is 14, the sum of the second set is 2. So you know that your numbers would be negative 3 and 5. So we plug in negative 3 plus 5, and this would be the answer to factoring this polynomial. So we can also find the root of an equation by solving the equation with factoring. So if we have an example like this, you have x squared plus 6x equals 27. You first want to write it in quadratic equation form. So we're going to begin by subtracting 27 from both sides, which would leave this equation equal to 0. So then you factor it out, so you have your x and your x. Again, we want two numbers that you can add together to give you 6, and then multiply together to give you negative 27. And so we would actually have negative 3 plus 9. So from here, you now want to set each of these equal to 0 to figure out your possible roots. So you have x minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 9 equals 0. So your root would be x equals 3 and x equals negative 9. Pause the video to complete the lesson review. You are factoring each polynomial for these examples.